The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the grand marble hallway of one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. Elena, a middle-aged cleaning lady with calloused hands and a tired smile, carefully balanced a tray of fresh towels as she moved swiftly between the suites. She had worked here for years, long enough to know which guests were kind, which were indifferent, and which ones barely acknowledged her existence. But tonight, something was different. As she stepped into the corridor leading to the penthouse, she noticed a group of men in sharp suits standing near the entrance, their expressions unreadable. At the center of it all stood a man who exuded power. His presence alone was enough to make people take a step back. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and carried an air of authority that only a few in this world possessed. Elena had seen many wealthy guests over the years, but there was no mistaking who he was. Nicholas Vaughn, the billionaire whose name was known across industries. His empire stretched from technology to real estate, and his wealth was the kind that made headlines. She wasn't meant to be here, not in his space, but duty called. She kept her head down, her movements practiced and efficient. But as she replaced the towels and turned to leave, she caught sight of something that made her pause. A glass, tipped over on the edge of the table, dangerously close to spilling onto an expensive stack of documents. Without thinking, she reached out and steadied it. It was a small gesture, but it brought her eyes level with Nicholas Vaughn himself. For a moment, their gazes locked. There was something in his expression. Exhaustion, perhaps frustration. But Elena didn't dwell on it. Instead, she simply spoke, her voice steady despite the weight of his presence. "Sir, if I may, you look tired. You should get some rest." It was a simple statement, but in the world of power and wealth, where people either feared or revered him, it was almost unheard of. No one dared to caution a billionaire. No one told him what he should do. The room fell into silence. The men around him stiffened, waiting for his reaction, but instead of irritation, a flicker of something unreadable crossed Nicholas's face. He studied her for a long moment before giving a barely perceptible nod. Elena quickly excused herself, feeling the weight of their stares as she left. She hadn't meant to overstep, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her words had reached him in a way she didn't expect. She brushed it off as just another moment in her long shift. By the time she reached her small apartment that night, she had nearly forgotten about it. Her world and his were too different, too far apart. She was just a cleaning lady. He was a man who had everything, or so she thought. The next evening, just as she was settling in after another long shift, the unmistakable sound of a jet engine roared through the quiet night sky. It was unusual. Her neighborhood wasn't the kind of place where private jets made appearances. Curious, she stepped out onto the balcony. What she saw next sent a shiver down her spine. A sleek, black private jet had landed at a small airstrip nearby. Even from a distance, she could see the luxury it exuded. More shocking, however, was the sight of a black car pulling up to her building. Her heart pounded in her chest. This couldn't be a coincidence. As the door opened, a familiar figure stepped out. Nicholas Vaughn. Elena's breath caught. What could a billionaire possibly want with her? Elena gripped the railing of her small balcony, her fingers tightening as her mind raced. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. Billionaires didn't just show up at the homes of ordinary people, especially not in her part of town. Yet there he was, stepping out of a sleek black car, his expression unreadable under the dim streetlights. Her first instinct was to back away, to pretend she hadn't seen anything. Maybe if she went inside, locked the door, and ignored whatever was happening, this moment would pass like a strange dream. But her feet wouldn't move. From where she stood, she saw Nicholas glance up, as if he could sense her watching. Even from a distance, his presence was overwhelming. A man like him didn't belong here. His tailored suit, the smooth confidence in his movements, the quiet authority that surrounded him like an invisible force field. Everything about him was out of place in this worn-down building with its cracked walls and flickering hallway lights. A knock echoed through her apartment. Elena's heart pounded. She didn't move. Maybe if she waited long enough, he would just leave. Maybe this was all a mistake. Another knock, this time firmer. Her legs felt weak as she forced herself toward the door. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and pulled it open. Nicholas Vaughn stood on her doorstep. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He wasn't just rich. He carried himself with the kind of confidence that came from years of being in control. But tonight, there was something else beneath that polished exterior. Something she couldn't quite place. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low, steady. Elena swallowed. "Why?" A flicker of amusement crossed his face, but it was gone in an instant. "Because last night, you did something no one else has done in a long time. You told me the truth." She frowned, confused. "All I did was tell you to get some rest." His jaw tightened slightly, as if he was considering his words carefully. "And yet, that simple statement did more than anyone in my entire circle has managed in years." Elena didn't know what to say to that. She had no idea what world he lived in, but she could guess. It was full of people who told him what he wanted to hear, who nodded and agreed, who made sure they never crossed a man like him. "Can I come in?" he asked after a beat. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was a bad idea. But there was something in his voice, not demand, not arrogance, but something almost tired, and that, more than anything, made her step aside. He entered her tiny apartment, and for a moment, he just stood there, taking in the modest space. It wasn't much. A small couch, a second-hand dining table, and a kitchen barely big enough for two people to stand in. The contrast between their worlds had never been clearer. "I don't understand," Elena said finally, crossing her arms. "You're one of the most powerful men in the world. Why would you care what I said?" Nicholas turned to face her. "Because I don't sleep. I haven't, not really, in years." She blinked. "That's not healthy." He let out a breath of what might have been a laugh. "I know." For the first time since she met him, he looked less like the billionaire everyone feared, and more like a man carrying something too heavy to bear. "I built an empire," he continued. "From nothing. Every decision I make affects thousands of people. I can't afford to slow down. I can't afford to be weak. And somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to stop. To just breathe." Elena listened, her skepticism fading into something else. Understanding. She didn't know what it was like to be a billionaire, but she knew what it was like to work yourself to the bone. To feel like stopping meant everything would fall apart. She hesitated before speaking. "And you came here because..." Nicholas met her gaze, something intense burning behind his eyes. "Because for the first time in years, someone reminded me that I'm human." A strange silence filled the room. Elena wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had spent years cleaning after people like him, invisible, unnoticed, and yet, somehow, she had said something that had shaken a man whose name alone could make people tremble. "I don't know what you expect from me," she admitted. "I don't either," he said, almost to himself. "But I had to see you again." Elena wasn't sure what to feel about that. There was an undeniable weight in his words, something she didn't quite understand yet. But before she could ask more, the distant sound of another car pulling up outside caught both of their attention. Nicholas stiffened. His entire demeanor changed in an instant. Gone was the man who had just spoken about his exhaustion, replaced by the calculating, unreadable billionaire. Once again, Elena frowned. Who? Stay inside, he cut in, his voice low, but firm. She barely had time to react before he moved toward the window, peering outside. His expression darkened. Something was wrong. Elena wasn't sure how, but she could feel it in the air, thick and heavy with tension. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just about some billionaire having an existential crisis. There was more to this, something bigger, something dangerous, and she was now right in the middle of it. Elena's heart pounded as she watched Nicholas's expression darken. He wasn't just looking outside. He was assessing, calculating. The man she had glimpsed just moments ago, the one who had admitted his exhaustion, was gone. In his place was someone sharp, alert, someone who knew danger when he saw it. "Who's out there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step back from the window, his jaw tightening. "I need you to trust me," he said finally. "Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone." Elena bristled at the command. "You're in my home. I deserve to know what's going on." He hesitated, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes, an internal battle, as if he was weighing whether or not to tell her the truth. Finally, he exhaled, his voice lower now. "Someone's been watching me, following me. I've ignored it for months. But now they're here." A chill ran down Elena's spine. "And you think they followed you here?" Nicholas didn't answer directly, but his silence was enough. Elena swallowed hard. She had no idea how her life had gone from cleaning hotel rooms to being caught in the middle of whatever this was. But she knew one thing. This wasn't just about her anymore. A sudden knock at the door made both of them freeze. Nicholas immediately stepped in front of her, his body tense. The knock came again, more insistent this time. "Elena!" A voice called from the other side. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Patel. Relief flooded her chest. She moved to open the door, but Nicholas caught her wrist, shaking his head. "Wait," he murmured. He motioned for her to step back, then leaned in close to the door. "Who's with you?" There was a pause. Then Mrs. Patel's voice, confused. "No one, Beta. Are you all right?" Elena exhaled sharply, gently pulling her wrist free from Nicholas's grip and opening the door. The older woman stood there, wrapped in her shawl. Her expression creased with worry. "I heard a car outside," Mrs. Patel said, peering past Elena into the apartment. "Saw some men standing by it. Thought I'd check in." Elena glanced at Nicholas, but his face gave away nothing. "Thanks, Mrs. Patel," she said, forcing a small smile. "I'm fine." The woman gave her a lingering look, then nodded before heading back to her own apartment. But the moment the door shut, Nicholas was already moving again. "We need to go," he said, reaching for his phone. Elena blinked. "Go? Go where?" "I have a plane ready," he said simply, dialing a number. "It's safer than staying here." She let out a short laugh, more from disbelief than anything else. "You expect me to just get on a plane with you? I don't even know what's happening." Nicholas looked at her then, and for the first time, there was something raw in his gaze, something close to urgency. "If you stay, you'll be in danger because of me." She hated that her life had been perfectly fine until the moment she had spoken to him in that hotel room. But deep down, she knew there was no going back now. Whoever was outside wasn't just here for him anymore. She took a breath. "Fine, but you owe me an explanation." Nicholas nodded once, already texting someone. You'll get one." Within minutes, they were in the car, the driver speeding toward the airstrip, where the private jet still waited. Elena stared out the window, the city lights blurring past. None of this felt real. "Who are these people?" she finally asked. Nicholas exhaled, rubbing his temple. "Business rivals. People who want to see me fall." He glanced at her. "And now, because you were there that night, they think you know something." Elena's stomach turned. "But I don't." "They don't know that." Silence filled the car. The weight of what he was saying pressed down on her. She had simply done her job, spoken a few words to a man she never expected to see again. And now her entire world had changed. The car pulled up to the jet, and Nicholas didn't waste time. He guided her up the stairs, his hand on her back as if he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Once inside, she sat down, feeling the hum of the engines beneath her. As the plane took off, Nicholas finally sat across from her, his expression unreadable once more. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Nicholas leaned back, exhaling. "Now, I make sure you're safe." She studied him, realizing that despite everything, he wasn't just protecting her. He was running too. Not from danger, but from the life he had built. The exhaustion, the pressure, the weight of always being the man in control. And somehow, in the middle of all of this, she had become the only person he trusted. Elena didn't know what the future held. She didn't know what would happen when this plane landed, or what it meant to be caught in Nicholas Vaughn's world. But as she looked at him, she realized something. This wasn't just about power or danger. This was about two people from completely different worlds, thrown together by fate. And for the first time, she wasn't just the invisible cleaning lady anymore. She was someone who mattered. Maybe, just maybe, that was enough.